Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, I want to talk about something that's actually creeped up underneath us as we started to talk about editing. Now, everything looked great as we were dropping clips into our timeline. However, there's something going on with the audio that's important that you understand, and a decision that has to be made right now at this point before moving forward so that you can make sure that your audio workflow in Media Composer is as smooth as it can possibly be. All right, now, before we get rolling, I do always want to give a big shout out and a big thanks to our sponsor, VideoGuys. You know I always talk about them. They are your source if you're looking for Media Composer subscription licenses. You can check out the show notes below to find the links for the version of Media Composer that you're looking to get the subscription for. Don't forget to use that coupon code of MC101 to get 5% off your license purchase, purchasing it through VideoGuys. And I also want to remind you that if you do like this tutorial, you like this tutorial series, please don't forget to like and subscribe to these tutorials. I want to make sure that you guys are aware every time new tutorials come out. I try to produce them. I try to do every Friday. Sometimes it's every Thursday or every Saturday, but I try to get them out every Friday so that you have the weekend to sit down, watch them, take in as much as you can. So please help like, subscribe, and share these across social media so that we get the word out there about Avid Media Composer. And last but certainly not least, I want to remind you that if you or your team are looking for one-on-one personalized Media Composer training, don't forget, you can always send an email to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. I record all of the lessons we do. I customize them specifically for what you or your team are looking for. And I make sure that when we're done, there's never any questions about what you wanted covered. We get right down to the nuts and bolts of it so that you get everything done you need to get done in Media Composer to keep that workflow on track. All right, so I think that's a good place to leave off for the introduction. Let's just jump into Media Composer and let's get started. All right, so let's Command or Alt and Tab into Avid Media Composer. And as you can see, I've pretty much left everything the way that we had it in the previous lesson. I basically just dropped 2 mono tracks into our timeline. Everything's looking great. What I'm going to do is press play. You'll notice things are looking the way that they should, and I'm fairly happy. However, there's a lot of things that are actually happening under the hood of Media Composer that you need to be aware of because it can really trip you up later on, or it can trip you up as you're bringing future audio tracks specifically into Media Composer. Now, before we talk about that, I want to talk about another essential tool inside of Media Composer that's just going to help you out, and that's the audio tool. Now, the audio tool is not the same as the audio mix tool. The audio tool is basically a larger version of this VU meter right here. Now, to call up the audio tool, fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Command or Control and 1 on the keyboard. You'll see it appears right here. You can actually increase its size and shrink it down. It only gets so big, so what I'm going to do is just sort of bring it right back to there. I'm going to come back to the beginning of my timeline, press play, and this is acting pretty much the way that I would assume that it should, but it actually isn't. So what is going on here? Well, to talk about what's going on, we need to sort of take a little bit of a trip back in the Wayback Time Machine to talk about Media Composer and how we got here as far as audio goes. Now, as we remember from the previous lesson, to add new audio tracks, fairly simple. Control or Command and U to add new audio tracks. Now, I'm only going to add in 6 audio tracks because I don't need to go crazy and add too many of them. And I said we were going in the Wayback Time Machine. The Wayback Time Machine to really when editors were first editing with Media Composer about 25 years ago, we didn't have this concept of mono channels and stereo channels and 5:1 channels and all this type of stuff. We just had audio channels. Everything was mono, and even stereo for the most part was still technically dual mono. Dual mono meaning 2 tracks, the left track being track 1 representing obviously stereo left, track 2 representing stereo right to make dual mono so that you had your audio actually playing one out the left channel, one out the right channel. To be honest, to this day, I even just worked on a huge popular reality show about a year ago. We had about 30 to 40 audio channels. They still functioned in that way. The editors were still editing with dual mono audio. Nothing wrong with that. Every odd channel was left. Every even channel was right. So there you go. So that what we've got here basically is left channel, left channel, left channel, right channel, right channel, right channel. And you might think that when I come back and press play, you'll see I have 2 channels here. And for the most part, if I sort of toggle over here, let me just call up that clip here. Hold on one second here. I'm just going to call it up into the preview window here. Let's actually make sure I have the clip. There we go. Very nice. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to expand my channels out. Now, don't worry about what you're seeing here. We're going to talk all about how to do this in a future lesson. But if you take a look, these channels look pretty darn the same. So what I'm assuming that I'm looking at when I press play here, let me actually just shrink my audio tracks down. When I press play, I assume that what I'm looking at is the left channel coming out the left side and audio channel 2 being the right channel coming out the right side. However, that's not exactly what is happening here. So what is happening? Well, to figure out what is happening, we need to go in and take a look at our audio settings. Of course, as soon as I say that word settings, what we're going to do, Command Shift and equals, Control Shift and equals for all my Windows friends out there. What we're going to do is navigate up to audio, and I want to draw your attention right here. Default pan for mono tracks is set to be centered. Keep in mind with the workflow that we're doing now by adding new audio tracks, Command or Control and U, all we're doing is creating a mono track, a mono track, a mono track, a mono track, of which the panning will all be set to centered. So what we're actually looking at here is not 2 channels playing back on the left channel and the right channel as what you might think, but if I mute one of them, you'll see that it's actually panning that track that's on channel 1 and the track that's on channel 2 both to the center. So this is where you can start to run into problems. Let me show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is just close my audio settings. I'm going to come to the desktop and I'm just going to bring in this cooking show clip, Option or Alt and drag into our timeline, and I'm simply going to double click on it. What appears here is a stereo music file, except watch what happens when I press play. Doesn't look stereo to me. What's actually happening is that the left track is being panned to the center, the right track is being panned to the center because of that audio setting, telling it to take any mono track, I'm using that in air quotes, and pan it to the center. If we keep that audio setting the way that it is, you now need to rethink about how you're going to bring in mono clips versus stereo clips. Let me show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this clip from the project, which is fine. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to input and I'm going to go to the source browser. I'm on the desktop with this clip already. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to head to my link settings. Now you might think I'm going to go back into the settings, Command Shift and equals, Control Shift and equals, but I'm not going to do that because we actually have access to both the import settings and the link settings right here. And I want to draw your attention in the link settings to your multi-channel audio. Multi-channel meaning stereo, 5.1, 7.1. And Media Composer wants to know how do you want to deal with those tracks. Now the problem that we run into in Media Composer is that when you create a new project and you create a new user, you actually have conflicting things happening here. The audio setting says take any track that's mono and pan it center. But your link options say that every channel that's coming in by default is mono, so just pan it center. Okay, you see how these two work with each other, but actually against each other. So in this workflow, the way that it's set up now, what you're actually going to have to do is to come in and say edit, and for every stereo pair that's going to come in, and I come down and say okay, and I say okay, and I bring it in, we actually want to make sure that it comes in as a proper stereo channel. So then what's going to happen is that instead of getting in and adding new audio mono tracks, what you're going to do is, let me actually make sure that I delete that, is you're going to Control Shift and U, Command Shift and U to add a new stereo track. Now once I brought this clip in as stereo, I want you to watch what happens over here in the VU meter. That is actually proper stereo. Therefore in my timeline, I need to get rid of one of these tracks. Okay? Now what I can do is simply take this audio clip and drop it in, and when I hit play, we'll actually have the audio being stereo, or the music being stereo, which it should, and the sound effects being mono because that's how they were recorded on location. Now, the question is, do you want to work this way? Now, I'm not going to tell you what the better way to work is. Whether the better way to work is to leave that audio setting as pan mono tracks to center and then go in and set your multi-track audio to be whatever you need it to be. I'm just going to tell you what works for me. And for me, this workflow doesn't work. I find it confusing. I have to get in. Well, what if I'm bringing in audio from someplace that's not actually stereo and it's mono? What if I have bringing in something that's 6 channels that it's suddenly now going to think is 5-1 instead of just being 6 individual channels? What am I going to do with this? For me, I like the what you see is what you get. Okay? So what I like to do is I'm just going to close this up here. All right, I'm going to leave this as being mono for right now, or 1 channel, single channel. Okay, and what I'm going to do is go back to my audio settings, Command, Shift, and equals on the keyboard, and I'm going to come into my audio setting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to change the default pan for mono tracks to be alternating left and right. I'm going to close this. I'm going to close the settings. I'm going to come back and press play, and I want you to watch what happens. You'll now see I have this audio on an odd track. It's coming out the left channel. You'll now also see that when I bring music in, what I'm going to do is just bring the music in again. Let's right click. Let's go to Input and Source Browser. Let's go to our settings. Let's just turn that linking off altogether here for stereo. All right. And I'm just going to bring that audio track back in again. What I now know is that with this audio track, and why didn't you do what you should do here? Let's try that again here. Let's go Input Source Browser. Now, it may be doing that because it knows that the clip was brought in before, which is fine. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to try just dragging it from the desktop. Let's see if that gives us the proper behavior here. Option or Alt and drag. Let's do this. Now you'll see it's still bringing it in as stereo because it remembers that the clip was stereo when I brought it in before. Okay, so this is actually a very good thing because I'm showing you the dual mono way of working, or pardon me, really the alternating left and right workflow. The question is, what would you do in a situation like this where the audio comes in as stereo and you don't want it to be? You want it to actually be dual mono. Let me show you how we would get in and modify this clip. It's actually quite simple. All you're going to do is right click on the clip and you're simply going to navigate to modify and modify clip. You'll notice that it's actually already on set multi-channel audio. Now in most cases it's on set timecode drop non-drop, but I like to just come in and make sure that I'm on set multi-channel audio, and I'm simply going to disable that. Now you'll notice here that if I drop that down, this is where you can get in, and if you've got things that are 6 channels or 8 channels, you can really get in and start saying, oh, I want this to be an actual 5-1, or I want this to be a 7-1, or whatever. No, for me, I like dealing with actual specific mono channels. I'm going to deselect that so it unpairs them, and I'm going to say OK. You'll now see these 2 tracks have appeared as audio 1 and audio 2. What I'm going to do is give myself 2 more audio channels, and I'm just going to make sure that they auto patch to those channels, and I'm going to drop this now into my timeline. What I'm going to do is just mute channel 1 for now, and watch what happens when I press play. It functions as stereo exactly the way that I think that it should. Okay? Audio 3 is left, audio 4 is right. It's appearing in my timeline exactly as I expect it. The only catch here, though, is that by default, when you drop a mono track in, it will always either be panned to the left if you have it on an odd channel, or to the right if you have it on an even channel. Now, I always like when this sort of happens when I'm doing training and something happens that I don't really expect. And you'll notice that when I selected the video, it selected the audio as well because the 2 of them are linked together, much like you see in Premiere, much like you see in Resolve. So the question is, how do we unlink the video and audio from each other? Well, it's actually quite simple. All I'm going to do is simply at the top of the timeline navigate right here to where it says link selection toggle. I'm simply going to deselect that, and now what I'm going to do is simply select either the audio or the video. All I wanted to do was just to bring that down 1 channel so that when I come back and I press play, you'll now see that it's appearing on the right channel. Now, how do we actually get in and pan that center? Well, we're actually going to jump ahead just a little bit here because I'll show this to you. It's kind of a little teaser for when we start really getting in and talking about audio. But to get in and to actually pan these channels to be center that we actually need to be pan center is actually very simple. And we're going to utilize the audio mixer to do it. To access the audio mixer, it's a tool much like any other tool. We're going to simply navigate to tools. I'm going to come down to audio mixer. You will now see that I have, there's my fader for audio 2, that's mono, for faders 3 and 4 that are dual mono, left and right. And what I love about this is that you see exactly where it's panned. What I want to make sure of is that this channel is panned to the middle. Well, God, this is the worst tool ever. How do we do this to get this to actually pan center? Well, believe it or not, you don't have to actually do all of this dragging like I'm doing right now. All you actually have to do is simply hold Option or Alt on the keyboard and simply click on the knob, and it will automatically pan that track to the center. Now again, we're jumping ahead just a little bit because the last thing I want is you to have to go through your entire timeline, select each one, mono. Okay, there's got to be an easier way to do it. Well, there is. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to deselect the dual mono stereo that I'm very happy with. I'm going to mark an in point and come all the way down to the end, and I'm going to come back to the clip that's pan I'm happy with. And what I'm going to do is come up to the fast menu and simply say set pan on track into out. And now that I've done that, you'll see that when I click through, all of the channels are now panned to the middle that are mono and need to be panned to the middle, so that when I come back and press play, you'll see, let me just move it out of the way here so I can see my audio tool, that everything is now working the way that I want it to. And when I turn my music tracks back on, what we now have is our on-camera dialogue, or really in this case, sort of our on-camera sound effects pan to the middle with our music being proper stereo, and we're now all set to go. So what is important to keep in mind here? And I know this was sort of a lot, what do I do? What my goal here was to show you what's happening. So keep in mind, new user settings are always going to come in, and it's going to take this audio setting and it's going to set this to be default pan for mono tracks to be centered. If that is the case, and that is the way that you want to work because you've come from a Premiere or from a DaVinci Resolve workflow and that is how you're accustomed to working, no problem. The only thing that you need to make sure of is that in your link settings, let's come down to link settings, that you have your linking options set for stereo or 5.1 or however you want to bring these clips in, so that when they appear in your bin, they are already a stereo pair, so that as you're creating new stereo tracks, they'll be panned correctly for playback. Again, for me, that's not my preferred workflow. I prefer working in mono and dual mono for everything. You got to remember, they go out onto location, they shoot 10 channels with a Tascam recorder. I want all 10 of those individual mono channels that I'm going to be selecting from. I want to do all the panning mono. I want to decide where all those channels are going to go. I don't have a problem if the music comes in and it's dual mono because I know how to tackle it. I know that all of the odd channels, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, are going to be left. I know that 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, they're all going to be right. As long as I remember that, and that is going to be our workflow moving forward in this tutorial series in a mono and dual mono workflow as opposed to stereo and 5.1 audio tracks. If you keep that in mind when you are working, you will never run into a problem or get confused by what Media Composer is doing to your timeline, and everything will always sound right when you hit play. All right, so that's enough for this lesson. Now, believe it or not, in our next lesson, we're going to talk about outputting. Now, you're probably thinking, Kev, outputting? How are we already talking about that? The most important thing to understand in Media Composer are 3 concepts: how to get your footage in correctly, how to drop clips into your timeline, how to output. If you understand how to do those 3 techniques, everything else that I show you on top of that is just bells and whistles, because now you know how to quickly get footage in, how to get it into a timeline, and output it conceivably in the same day, as opposed to waiting, 32 hours worth of tutorials to find out how to output. So this way, you can get out whatever you're working on correctly, so you can get it to that client to get whatever approvals you need. Now, as always, I want to give a big thanks to our sponsor, Video Guys. Don't forget, if you're looking for those Media Composer subscriptions, head on down to the show notes below. Click on those links. Use the coupon code of MC101 to get that 5% discount. They have an awesome support team there. If you ever run into issues, you can always hit them up and get all of those questions answered. And please, if you like this tutorial, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it across social media to help all the editors who are trying to jump into Media Composer, Premiere, and Resolve to get those. And don't worry, Final Cut Pro editors, I didn't forget you. And even Final Cut editors, I want you guys to be able to jump in here as well to get the most out of these tutorials so that you can quickly do what you need to do inside of Avid Media Composer with little to no learning curve. And last but certainly not least, if you have any questions, you can always send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. Thanks a lot for watching.